As many of you are, probably even most of you are keenly aware, there has become an acceptance of socialism in the United States. It's beyond question. There's a growing acceptance, a growing desire for our government at least to begin leaning that direction. In the 2018 midterm elections, a 28-year-old Democratic socialist nicknamed AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, defeated incumbent Democrat Joseph Crowley. A recent poll reveals that 57% of Democrats are favorable toward socialism, while only 47% are favorable toward capitalism. The Democratic Socialists of America has seen their membership grow sevenfold since the 2016 midterm elections. They had a membership prior to 2016 at 6,000. Today it's over 43,000 people have joined. The irony, I think, is that most Americans have no idea what socialism truly is. Couple that with what we're going to be looking at today, there is a more grave threat from a socialist understanding of not only the economy, but of a way of life that, to me, is far more serious than the economic aspect of it. And what I mean by that, as you'll see more clearly in a few moments. As I embark on this, I want you to understand something, though, on the onset. I'm not getting into a debate between socialism and capitalism. I'm not even venturing into the arena of politics associated with the two different economic systems. What my intent is this morning is to deal with the growing acceptance of socialism, but I want to point out a particular aspect of it that should concern every Bible-believing, Christ-serving person in this world. We see a lot and hear a lot on college and university campuses where, unfortunately, a vast majority of the professors seem to hold to a Marxist worldview, turning out students that also embrace that worldview, failing to understand the implications of seeking out that kind of political and economic system. So my intention is, like I mentioned just a moment ago, what I'm going back to here is to deal with what socialism ultimately does. You see, socialism will not tolerate any rivals. And you need to understand very vividly and clearly that Christianity is a rival to socialism. And that'll become more clear, I think, in a few moments. You see, socialism is not simply an economic system. If it was simply an economic system, maybe it'd be more palatable. But it's a religious system, primarily atheism, but sometimes we think atheism is not religious, but it is. It's a faith commitment. And when socialism, or when a country seeks to become socialist in its orientation, there's going to be something that will take place that you can see exemplified in nation after nation that has attempted the socialist experiment. Whether you look at full-blown communism like the former Soviet Union, or if you look at the socialism of Venezuela, you will see there that there is a similar track that goes in both ways here. And it has to do with freedom, and socialism cannot coexist. But freedom, as it is encompassed in our Constitution, religious freedom, cannot exist with socialism. Your personal freedom cannot coexist with socialism. It's impossible. The two systems are diametrically opposed. It doesn't look like that. It doesn't sound like that at first. But when it begins working its way out, you'll see that indeed it is. A number of years ago, sitting in Jones Auditorium on the campus of College of the Ozarks, the founder of martyrs for Jesus was there. His name was Wallenbrandt. And he couldn't stand and address the college group that was there. He had to sit. There's a reason why he couldn't stand. You see, he was a pastor in Romania. In Romania, he was captured threatened first, and then he was taken prisoner, arrested, I should say, by the secret police. The secret police, he was then incarcerated for 14 years. He chronicles this in a book titled simply Tortured for Jesus. In the book, he talks about the kind of tortures that he and fellow Christians experienced at the hands of the Romanian secret police. He couldn't stand, by the way, because his feet had been beaten, the bottoms of his feet had been beaten with chains and iron bars for so many years that he could no longer stand for a very long period of time because of the pain that his feet still experienced. Why was he arrested? Why was he tortured for Christ? He was tortured because he was a Christian. And he was not adhering to the socialist government, the communist government of Romania. Nevertheless, I want you to hear what God says to us in Exodus chapter 20, verses 3 through 6. God says, "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image in any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or in the earth beneath, or that is in the water or under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I am the Lord your God. I am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments." But as we interject in any kind of talk like this, we must first begin with definitions. What are we talking about? I mean, the word can be used in a lot of different contexts. It can be slung around in a lot of different ways of approaching it. So what are we talking about when I say socialism? Well, what I'm talking about the system that Karl Marx and his buddy Engels wrote in their book titled The Communist Manifesto, in which they espoused several things, but two primary things for our purposes this morning, and that is to see a new way to look at humanity and a new way to look at economic system. Now, there are varying degrees of what we call socialism. Depends on where you're at, which nation you're looking at. In the nations that have attempted socialism, communism, it never has worked. It has been a miserable failure. Can you say Venezuela? Can you say the former Soviet Union? It's interesting to me, I'm kind of deviating for a moment, I'll come back to more definition in just a moment. It's interesting to me to listen to college students, kind of like on a man on the street kind of interview, how they will espouse their favorable attitude towards socialism. And it's quite another thing when the man on the street, the fellow with the microphone asking the questions, what do you think of socialism, when he would ask someone from the former Soviet Union, or if he asked someone from Venezuela, or someone from another nation that has been socialist or communist in their governmental system, in their economic system, they will say something totally different. A number of years ago, here in Salem, there was a pastor. His name was Florin. Florin grew up in Romania. And he was a part of our ministerial alliance for a handful of years before he moved on to other ministries. But he'd talk about a little bit about what it was like. And he's talking about the fear that was inherent among the people. Because everywhere you feared, there were the secret police. What their function was, if they could find any dissenter, they would take that dissenter into custody. And then in a few moments I'll tell you about the approach that Marx even advocated. Well, anyway, The fear that people have is, your neighbor may turn you in. A member of your family might turn you in to the secret police. And you don't always know who the secret police are. So people living in that kind of regime are always under the auspices or the fear and the anxiety of who's watching, who's taking note of what's going on. But we need to talk about this a little more clearly. So what are we talking about? What are we talking about when I talk about socialism? Well, in somewhat of a humorous way, Jacob Brondy talks about it this way. He says socialism is as follows. If you have 2 cows, the government takes one of your cows and gives it to your neighbor. Communism. If you have 2 cows, the government takes your cows and the government will give you some milk. Under fascism, if you have 2 cows, you keep the 2 cows, you give the milk to the government, and the government sells you the milk. Under New Dealism, if you have 2 cows, you shoot one, milk the other, and then you pour the milk down the drain. Under Nazism, if you have 2 cows, the government shoots you and keeps the cows. And under capitalism, if you have 2 cows, you sell 1 cow and you buy a bull. Even though that's somewhat simplistic, there is some truth ringing in those particular definitions. But the true definition, what is socialism? Well, first, it's an economic system. It's a system that seeks to nationalize major industries in a country and put those industries under the control of the government. Can anybody say Obamacare? Nevertheless, the government becomes the one in charge. Now, how this works, according to those who are far smarter on the subject than I, how this works is the government takes control and the government will produce what they want you to have. Whatever it is. And then they will, by producing that, you are required to buy what they have produced. Which is not a very meaningful system if you take it out a little bit, and you can see about the shortages that you find in Venezuela and other places because of those kind of governmental regulations. But basically, the government takes control of the major industries within a nation, within a country. And the government begins to control it. Now, I don't want to be too facetious, and I'm not trying to be overly critical, but do you know anything that the government does well? And I mean that seriously. I mean, really, do you know anything? And I'm not throwing rocks, I'm just making an observation. When one of my daughters got married, she wanted me to go to the Social Security office with her. And if you work in the Social Security office, I'm sorry. But I want to tell you what it was like. I want to tell you what it's like. We go in, we take our number, we sit down. We're in a room full of people. Everybody's tired of waiting because we've all been waiting. And we go and finally her number was called. She goes to the window and there's a person, no smile, no expression other than not even looking up, because I stand there beside her and stand there and looking at it. Okay, here, up. You don't have this. There's this thing you need. Next. Wait a minute. I mean, we brought what it said to bring. Anyway, the bottom line of it is it was a very frustrating experience because it's very inefficiently handled. And not only that, the frustration of the people that are there is raising because we're not the only ones being told we're insufficient in what we're bringing. We need to go get whatever else. And one time, again, I'm going to give you the observation. I went with my dad years ago to the VA hospital. Do I need to say more? No. Now, what I'm saying, can you imagine every part of our public life like that? Can you imagine that? So first, it's an economic system. The major industries are nationalized and controlled by the government. Secondly, it exalts the community over the individual. It exalts the community over the individual. What I mean by that is to practically work this out, the state has to take priority over the individual person, which means you will and you must sacrifice personal freedom. A third aspect of socialism is it is hostile toward private property. You see, the idea is it becomes common. The property is controlled and held by the government. Another is competition is bad, cooperation is better. The whole idea, now, this is what makes socialism attractive to so many, is it's the idea of fairness, that it's fair. Everybody's is on the same level playing field. But that's not the way it practically works out. It never does. You're not on a level playing field. As it says in Animal Farm, if you ever read that book or saw the cartoon, all animals are created equal, just some animals are more equal than others. It always works out that way. There's going to be a hierarchy. There's going to be those who are in control, and they're going to love the system because they benefit from it. Everyone else is pushed down. Another, human nature is changeable. This is why it won't work. This is why it has never worked. Without coercion and without, well, anyway. The idea is that human nature is changeable. People will adjust and thrive under a socialistic system. If you don't adjust, what happens? You are going to be re-educated. What if re-education doesn't work? You are eliminated. I'm not overstating it. The next time an atheist comes and tells you about all of the wicked things in Christianity, the Crusades and the Salem witch burnings and all that kind of thing, you need to remind them of something. Atheism, through a socialistic/communistic approach, from 1914 until 1976, eliminated 85 to 100 million people. If you don't adjust and you do not fare well with re-education, there is elimination. And those in charge will eliminate their own citizens. Now, that's all quite serious. There's another aspect of it, and that is socialism offers an alternative, redemptive story. You need to look at the back of your bulletin. There's an illustration there that you need to follow. This is what Marx envisioned. On the right side, as you see there, you see Marx's redemptive story. On the left side, the biblical redemptive story. I want you to look at the biblical one first. God's creation is good. Where do you find that? You look in Genesis, you find it there. Go up to what's the problem? Well, there's disobedience. There's rebellion in the garden. Because of Adam and Eve's sin is then a part of the DNA of all of their descendants. That's us. And we live in a day in which we see the effects of sin. Why is there disease? Why are there these things that seem to happen? Why is there suffering and whatnot? It's because of sin. It's because of sin. But there is Christ's coming kingdom where He will set right all wrongs. In His kingdom, there won't be any hunger. There won't be suffering. There won't be any of these diseases or death or all of these kind of things in His kingdom. That's what the Bible gives us in a nutshell. But here's Marx's view. You know, remember, Karl Marx was an atheist. But this is what he said. He begins with thinking about humanity, of course, from a Darwinian perspective. He does so with a primitive communism. That's when people were hunters and gatherers. When they lived in small villages, and everybody just scraped to survive. They would gather stuff. They would be transient. They would move from one place to another, wherever the herds were. And basically, it was just survival. That's how he envisioned humanity's beginning. And then he moves up to a division of labor. Now, this is where there's starting to be bosses and workers. And however that is fleshed out through the Middle Ages and other times, even up to our own day, you see that kind of thing where there is that division of labor that's taking place. His next step up, as you see in your illustration there, class struggle. Put a mark right there. See, that's where we are. A class struggle. It's not by accident that you will hear politicians primarily talk about this group and that group, and usually setting this group against another group. Do you remember the protests against the one percenters? Remember that? All these people camping out in was it in New York City in the park there? They're all hundreds and hundreds of people camping out there protesting what they called the 1%, and the leaders were the 1%. I marvel at people, and I'm stepping back. It's a question I have. I don't have an answer to. When someone who is a democratic socialist, like a particular presidential candidate, who now is he's even admitted that he's a multimillionaire. What is he doing with those multi-millions? Is he sharing it with those who don't have it? I'm not being facetious. I'm asking a simple question. Socialistic governments and those involved in it really enjoy, seemingly, the prospect of giving money away to help people. It's good. And they feel apparently generous doing that and good about doing that. The problem is it's not their money they're giving away. It's other monies that they have taken from other people and redistributed it. That's the goal. That's the goal. And then, of course, Marx envisioned what he called a classless society, even a society with no need of a government, where everyone was on an equal footing. Now, the attractiveness of it is the idea of helping the disadvantaged. And I understand that. I can understand why that would be attractive to people. It should be attractive to us. That we do care about the plight of people. We do care about the poor. We do care about the disadvantaged. We do care about their needs. We should. But the problem is that where it leads away from the biblical revealed account of what really does benefit humanity. It's Christ. Socialism will never accept Christ because Christ is a competitor. And if you go into socialistic countries or communistic countries, do you know what you will not find? Freedom of religion. You won't find it because it doesn't exist. Oh, they may have a state church that's controlled by the party, but it's not free. It's not a free exercise of religion like our Constitution affords us. No, it's not. Because you're still worried about the secret police and the threats that come. Now, I'm going to get to the heart of my message. You may think, what have you been talking about? No, I want to get to the heart of it. Because this is where the rubber hits the road for you and me. Does the Bible actually, as some purport, some claim, does the Bible really support socialism or a socialistic approach to life? Does it? Well, in the Old Testament you find the sabbatical years. How did those work? Well, every seventh year, there was a time of celebration. If you had sold yourself into slavery because of economic reasons, if you sold yourself in to be a slave for someone for a period of time, when that seventh year rolled around, guess what? You were free. What if you borrowed money and you couldn't pay it all back by the time that seventh year rolled around? You were to be forgiven your debt. When 7 sevens rolled around, or the 50th year, was called the year of Jubilee. The year of Jubilee included what I just mentioned at the sabbatical years, but it included an additional benefit, I suppose. When the children of Israel moved into the land, they were allotted property. Now, during that 50-year period, it could be possible that, you hit economic hard times, you had to sell off part of your property. Or you had to sell all of your property. When the 50th year, the year of Jubilee came around, that property was returned to your family. It was given back. So those who are proponents of socialism from a religious perspective say, well, see, the Old Testament tells us that that's the way to live. Well, does it? Does it? Is that really what is going on there? And the truth is, no, it's not. Not when you look closely at the tenets of socialism, because a vital part of ancient Hebrew life was owning property. You were to own property. Property gave you independence. Property gave you a way of providing for your family. Property was incredibly important. The land is important. And there are other differences too, but the one that's appealed to most is the New Testament. In the New Testament, Acts chapter 4, verses 32 through 37, is a passage that's often appealed to as being a pro-socialist passage of Scripture. And when you hear it, you might draw that conclusion until you look a little more carefully at it. So what's the Scripture say? Well, let's read it together. It goes first like this. Now the full number, this is verse 32, chapter 4 of the book of Acts, the full number of those who had believed were of one heart and one soul. And no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. See? Socialism, right? And with great power, the apostles were giving their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. There was not a needy person among them. For as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what they had sold and laid them at the apostles' feet. And it was distributed to each as any had need. Thus Joseph, who was also called by the apostles Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, a Levite, a native of Cyprus, he sold a field that belonged to him and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. Now, are we talking about socialism here? He said no one claimed anything belonged to himself. They had everything in common. People who owned houses and lands at times would sell those and bring the money and give it to the apostles, that is, lay it at the apostles' feet to them. And then that was distributed to those who had need, so there wasn't anyone among them that had needs to survive. Is that socialism? And the answer is it is not. It is not. I'm going to give you 4 reasons why. There are more, but for the sake of time, I'm going to give you only 4. Number 1, it was voluntary. It was voluntary. In socialism, it is not voluntary. It is taken actually by force or by threat. Secondly, no ruling body or government ordered it. The apostles didn't come up. The apostles didn't preach, You who have means, you have land, you have that, you need to sell it and bring the money to us so we can give it to other people. That wasn't done. There wasn't any kind of coercion. There was nothing like that. It was strictly voluntary, and there was no ruling body or government demanding it and forcing it to take place. Thirdly, it was not commanded by God. You don't find there in the passage that, thus saith the Lord. There wasn't an apostle that stood up and said, God revealed to me, this is what we are to do. None of that. It was not by direct command of God to do this. And then fourthly, it was not ordained to continue. How do I know that? Well, in chapter 4, this is where this is written, at the very end of chapter 4. When I get to chapter 6, what's going on? Do you remember? There was a daily distribution of food, but some people were being neglected in light of others. So that's where the first deacons came to be, where they would make sure that people were taken care of. Again, it was not mandatory in any respect. You need to let that sink in. Socialism, it's mandatory. In the early biblical account, it was not mandatory. Make sense to you? Are you with me? Again, I'm not getting into a debate about the politics of this. I want you to see the threat of this. So, I'm going to give you 3 principles as I kind of begin winding down. The first principle is, as followers of Christ, we should be concerned for those that are poor. As followers of Christ, we should be concerned for those who are poor, those who are struggling, the downcast. We should be concerned and not turn a blind eye to their plight. That goes without saying. It should go without saying. And is all through the New Testament as well as woven through the Old, that we care for the needs of the poor. That's the first principle. We should. Secondly, however, we need to remember that salvation, I'll read what I've got written down here first. As followers of Christ, we should never look for salvation in any other than Christ Himself. See, socialism leads to the state. The state meets your needs. The state will not allow any competitors. Because the state will not allow competitors. If there is a competitor, they will come down hard. Christians, they are competitors. That's why the two will not coexist. Some of those within our own government that are from a democratic socialist perspective, are you noticing some of the questions are being asked now? Maybe not. Cory Booker was asking a nominee to serve as a judge. He asked her, since she was a Catholic, he asked her, is homosexuality a sin? Now I want to stop for a moment. Why would he ask that question? Why would he dare ask that question? What does that question have to do with her ability to sit on a bench and be a just judge? It has nothing to do with that. What he was poking at is her belief system because it was contrary to his. He didn't want a person on the bench who might view a particular practice as sin. You see, it will not allow any competitor. If you back during the days of the former Soviet Union, there wasn't a free church. There wasn't free Christians. Today, if you go into China, China isn't free. They will take a dignitary from the United States to the state church and show you a beautiful building, but they won't show you the ones they've just bulldozed down. They'll take you and let you meet the people who belong to the party who populate those pews on a given Sunday, but they will not take you to the prisons where other Christians are being held and being tortured, because the two cannot coexist. The two cannot coexist. So my contention for you this morning today is not the economics of this whole system, it's the religious threat of this system. Do you know what they would do to me today if I was giving this message in China? Or even in some of the Soviet bloc countries now? Do you know what they would do to me? I'll tell you what they'd do to a person like me. Maybe during the service or some of the time, it could happen walking along the street. There'd be a car would pull up beside me. Men would jump out, a hood would be put over my head, and I'd be thrown in the back seat. I'd be taken somewhere, and nobody would know where. My family wouldn't know where. You wouldn't know where. You couldn't find out where they had taken me. I may never come back. If I did come back, I'd come back a very broken man, physically. Back to the book, Tortured for Christ. In there he writes, from the Voice of the Martyrs. I misquoted it earlier, but it's called The Voice of the Martyrs. In that book that he was talking about preachers, pastors, because he's one of them, talking about the solitary confinement, the regular beatings. And he said he told a story there. It was absolutely mind-boggling to me. He said if any of those prisoners would try to encourage the other prisoners, the result would be they'd be taken to a room and they'd be re-educated and brought back. He was talking about a particular a pastor, once was a pastor, preacher. He began to preach a sermon to those that were confined to those cells. He was taken by the guards, taken to a room where you could hear yells and screams. He was brought back to his cell because he had broke the rules. He had begun preaching a message, bloody, limping, injured significantly, thrown back into his cell, and in the account in the book, you know what he says what happened next? That fellow rose to his feet. He said, "Brothers, where was I before I was interrupted?" It could cost him his life. It cost him his life. That's the kind of system this leads to. You know why? A couple of things. One, Marx did not understand human nature. You see, you can dominate people by fear. You can rule over them by holding the food strings that they need. But you can never change a human heart. Christ can do that. Socialism cannot. Because of that, if I go a little bit further, that's why the socialist ideal will never occur, because it can't. Because it can't. And the socialist idea and pursuit always leads to the extermination of people who don't fit into the system. And Christian, you don't fit. You don't fit. Finally, it's what I've been talking about. I'll say it this way. As followers of Christ, you should understand that socialism, as it is on this planet, and as it is worked out through fallen mankind, always will be hostile toward Christians. It always will be hostile. What's the bottom line in all this? Not to get you to fear, Politicians. It's not to get you to be overly concerned about your bank account. It's not to get you overly concerned what the government's going to do or not going to do. My point is, the bottom line, the only salvation that is available to any human being is not going to be achieved through human effort, human coercion, or anything of the like. It is only going to be achieved through the blood of Jesus Christ. Because He changes a man, He changes a woman on the inside. Not from the outside to conform, but from the inside out. He's the only one that can really change human nature. No one else can. No other system can. And we need to be keenly aware of that. So if the trends are correct, you can expect a sharp increase in what's called the democratic socialists. And yes, they're going to be wanting more and more. But you and I should be, with all more tenacity, be serving the Christ who gave Himself for us. With more vigor and more desire and more energy than we maybe have in the past, that we do that now. Because He really is the answer. Marx was wrong. Horribly wrong. But a lot of others are horribly wrong too, who exclude what Jesus and He alone can do. You see, it's Him. It's Him. It's all Him. It's totally Him. What Marx is was envisioning, this classless society, no need of government. That'll never happen. But in Christ, there will be literally what others are seeking called a utopia. He is the only one that can provide one. Mankind never will. Do you know that? Do you believe that? Are you committed to that? Do you trust in Him for that? Because that's the only answer. Why is socialism hostile toward Christianity? Because Christ is the answer. Socialism and every other ism you want to put on there isn't. But Christ is. Bow with me, please.